63a, right at the top. Um, Nazir Shagilach, a Nazir who, at the end of his period, he finished his Naziris, he cut his hair. But he hasn't yet brought the sacrifices and completed the ritual. No, sorry, he did that. No, he's completely finished. I'm sorry, he's completely finished with his Naziris. Vinodoloshu Tame, and then he found out that he, during his Naziris period, had become Tame. Okay, somebody came and reported him, where you went you went on that trip last week. You accidentally walked over a path that made you Tame. So here we have a new concept. In Tuma Yadua, if it was a known Tuma, in other words, one that could be expected to be known by people, and the Gemara will examine the parameters of this, then Soser, then his Nazirus was interrupted. In other words, he found out afterwards that his Nazirus had been interrupted, unknown to him. So now he has to do it again. Being tumas to hum, but if it is what translated tuma of the deep, or a concealed tuma, in other words, one that, well, for now we'll go with the definition that one that no one could have been expected to know about this. Okay, it was completely concealed from everybody, and only discovered later. Inososer, then that doesn't count. He doesn't have to worry about that. That does not retroactively interrupt his Nazirus. And we'll see why in the Gemara. But not to spoil anything, but basically the Gemara will conclude this is just a rule. Halacha lo Moshe Sinai. It's not logical. It's not based on any verses, but it is a tradition. This difference between known tuma and unknown tuma. And unknown tuma is not a good definition either, because the whole point is it eventually becomes known. But at the time that he experienced it, it was not known by anybody to be there. Okay. But if he had not yet shaved his hair, not yet completed his Nazirs, then there's no distinction. Then if somebody tells him you became Tame, you're still a Nazir, you became Tame last week, doesn't matter what kind of Tuma, it interrupts his Nazirs. Ketzad. Now the Mishnah will spell this out in a sample case. Yarlit Bobamara. He went down into a cave. There was a pool in the cave, a place that served as a mikvah. And then later, after he left, a dead body was found floating on the water at the entrance to the cave. Tame, then you're Tame. So that is an example of tuma that could have been known by someone. Nimsa Meshuka Bakarka Hamara. But what if the dead body was found at the bottom of this pool? So then Yard Lahaker Tahar. Then if he went in just to not to go to the mikvah, but because it was a hot day and he found some cool water in the cave. So it was just a casual visit, and it was a tuma that was not known by anybody. Then it doesn't interrupt his Nazirs. The Tarmi tumas meis tame. But if he went into the pool as a mikvah because he was tame, then he remains tame. Shecheskas tame tame, v'cheskas tahar tahar, shoraglaim l'davar. Because we're not going to change your state. So here's another complicating factor. The Nazir is tahar. He goes for a bath. And he goes for a swim. If there's this tuma of the deep involved, then we leave him in his tahar situation. We don't say that you have become tame. If he is already tame, and this is not necessarily a Nazir, but if someone goes to that pool because he is tame, and then it's later discovered there was tuma satahom, this tuma of the deep there, then he remains tame. Okay, he doesn't. Okay, so first question: where does this come from? This distinction between known tuma and unknown tuma. Amar Belazar, if someone dies on you suddenly, um, I'm talking about the Nazir, right? Then this is where where the Torah says what happens if you become tummy when you're a Nazir, and it's the case it brings is if someone dies suddenly, next to you in the room, and you become tummy, then you have to repeat your Nazirus. So it uses the word alav on him, it has to be clear to you. It's not really apparent in the meaning of the word, but I guess the use of the extra word when someone dies on you, right? The on you is extra, so that excludes, according to Rabbi Lazar, this tuma of the deep, this unknown tuma. Rish Lakish says a different verse. Amar ki tamei nefesh over there. So in a different context, where we're talking about Pesach Sheni, where a person is unable to bring the carbon Pesach because he is either tamei or far away on a distant road. In other words, he's not in the temple. Then there's a Pesach Sheni. There's a makeup Pesach a month later. So what does this have to do with us? Ki derech. So a person becoming tamei has to be like a road. Okay, like it uses two things. If you're tamei or you're a far away, a far road. Okay, so there's a analogy drawn between becoming tamei and being on the road. Ki derech, the tuma has to be like a road. In other words, open. Ma derech b'galoi, af kol b'galoi. The path is obviously in the open. Your tuma also has to be in the open, which excludes this tuma of the deep. So of course, this only applies to the carbon pesach, but we'll see that that there's a link drawn between the type of tuma that disqualifies you from the carbon pesach and from completing your nazirus. So we have two possible sources. But what about this following brisa? Ezi tuma satam. What is tuma of the deep? Kol she'eno makira echad b'sof ha'olam. Nobody in the world could know about it. Anybody. Makira echad b'sof ha'olam. But if there's one person who, let's say, when the dead body, when that person died, he had one companion who knew about it and knew that the body was buried here, or sunk here or whatever. And, then that person, years later goes on a trip, he's far away or whatever. Like there's only one person who knows this, and that's not called Tuma Stom. Someone knows about this Tuma, therefore it's not called Tuma of the Deep. Bishlam Mandi Amar Ki Derech Shapir. Okay, so this rule is makes sense if your source for the Tumas Atom is that it has to be like a road. In other words, open, recognizable by somebody. So there's somebody who knows about this. Doesn't mean that everybody in the world has to know about this. If somebody knows about it, then it's clear. Okay? But if your source is Elamandiar bin Mechuvereslo, but if your source is Chiyamus Meis Alav, if it's the Nazir himself who has to know about the Tuma, right? Then Kimakir Olam might have it. So like what does it matter if somebody on the other side of the world knows about it? The derivation was that the Nazir himself has to know about it for it to be an open Tuma. All right. The two, and furthermore, Hadatanya, we have another brisa. If you find the dead body lying across the road, in other words, you could not have traversed that road without encountering the body. So betruma tame. If we're talking about truma, if you're carrying regarding eating truma, then we consider you tame. The nazir vasias pasach tahar. But regarding, and now you don't know obviously that you've encountered this dead body, right? But then if it's might have been dark outside or whatever, or you might have been in a wagon and not seen what was on the road. But if it's reported to you afterwards that you crossed the road, that you traversed the road on which a dead body had been covering the whole road, then we have to assume you're Tame, but only with regarding to Truma. With regarding to Nazir or becoming Tame to disqualify you from the carbon Pesach, we don't consider you Tame. Maishna, what's the difference? Uh, like what's the neither of the verses that we adduced as proofs seem to allow for this kind of exception. So Gemara answers, as I said earlier, this whole idea of Tuma of the deep, this unknown Tuma, the rules about it are not derived from verses in the Torah. They're not logical. They're just a tradition. Okay, halacha Moshe Sinai, and the rules are what they are, and the fact that there's inconsistencies, doesn't bother us. Therefore, okay. Now the Mishnah had said, "Ima shelo gilach," if you hadn't yet shaved. Mantana. So who is the author of our Mishnah? Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Eliezer, Hidiyamar tiglachas ma'keves. It must be Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer says that what releases you from your Naziris, what's the final stage that makes you not a Nazir anymore? It's the haircutting. It's not the elapsing of the 30-day period. It's the haircutting, right? So by the fact that the Mishnah refers to if you hadn't cut your hair yet, then that indicates that it's, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that it's authored by Rabbi Eliezer, who says that is the critical point, or the end point of your Nazirus. Why Rami Barchama? So Rami Barchama asks, let's say you contract this tuma of the deep, or any kind of tuma, before the end of your Nazirus. But you only found out about it after your term. Okay, so then, Mahu, what's the story? Do we consider him tummy from the time that he found out about it, and it's after his term, so we're not concerned about his term, like his Nazirus is complete alone. Or not, and what's the difference? Lamitzar, like as I said, if you have to repeat your term. Amarava, Tashma, let's see a proof. So our Mishnah said if you hadn't shaved your hair yet, then any kind of tuma, whether it's known or unknown tuma, that undoes your Nazirs, you have to do it again. Hey, so what are we talking about? If we're talking about you found out within your term, like within the term of your Nazirs, you found out about this tuma, then then obviously, what's the question, right? Like, why is the Mishnah even telling us that? That you have to repeat your term. I mean, that's a basic rule of Nazirus. You become Tommy during your term, you repeat your term. So it must be the Mishnah is talking about after you find out afterwards, and that's why it has to tell you Shmamina. That's why it has to tell you the rule of that this difference between known tuma and unknown tuma. Okay. But you could still ask Kulo Soser or Shiva Soser. Okay. So I've been saying that you have to repeat your Nazirus, but now we're going to ask the question, maybe since this is a case of where you found out after your Nazirus is completed, right? So how much of your Nazirus do you have to repeat? You have to repeat the whole 30 days, or just make up the time during which you were Tameh, which is 7 days, right? Lama. So, how does this question make sense? One wants to know. According to the rabbis, Shita de Kulo Soser, it's obvious that it breaks the whole thing because his term is not finished yet. And according to Rabbi Eliezer, Shiva Soser, the Rabbi Eliezer has an opinion that anytime you find out after your term that you had become tummy during the term, it's only a 7-day makeup period. Rabbi Eliezer would say, that is when you become tame after your 30-day term, but before you manage to cut your hair. Then you only make up the 7 days because you really finished your whole 30-day period, right? You just hadn't completed the ritual. So then you become tame. At that point, then you only have to wait 7 days. V'hai lifnei malosu, but if you become tame before the end of the 30 days, then maybe it's different. Odilma, or maybe Rabbi Elazar would say shani hacha, didi acha malosi, or maybe it's you find this is because you found that afterwards. So according to Rabbi Eliezer, you could say that it's a good question, right? Do you have to repeat the whole 30 days or just make up the 7 days? No, from the wording of the Mishnah, Katani ben kaku ben sir. Mishnah says either way you have to you forfeit the Nazirus. Doesn't make a distinction between if it's during the term or after the term, and so it must be the whole 30 days. Okay. Rabbi's talk. So we just saw this case of if you find a dead body lying across the road that you had been on. So regarding truma, eating truma, you're tame. Regarding your nazirus or your carbon pesach, it's like you don't know for sure that you became tame. So you are tahor. But when does that apply? That's only if there's no room for you to go by. As I said before, the dead body is lying across the whole road. There's no way that you would have been able to travel that road without encountering this body. But if there was a part of the road that was not covered by the body, then like you don't know that you encountered the dead body. So the fact that it's possible that you didn't because part of the road was not obstructed by the dead body, then you're off the hook. You're not tame even regarding truma. But when is this the case? That's if the body was found in one piece. Or if it's found in different pieces, even if it still covered the whole road. Like maybe, the fact that it's in pieces and when you found it, it was covering the whole road. But maybe when you passed by, the pieces were separated and there was room for you to pass by possibly without having passed over the parts of the body. Uba kever, but if the dead body was found buried in a tomb, so underneath the road, then it doesn't matter. It's like in a coffin or a shroud, right? So then even if the body was in pieces, then you're still tame because you passed over the grave, right? The whole grave is tame. So even if within the grave the body is in separate pieces, that doesn't matter. You passed over the grave, the whole, so you've definitely passed over something that made you tame. And when do we say all this? If you're walking, but if you're riding, or if you're carrying something, then tame. Why are you tame? Because then you have tumas ohel, right? So let's say you're carrying a load that extends beyond the contour of your body, right? And you're carrying it on top of your head or on your shoulders, right? So then anything that's under that acts as an ohel, as a roof, right? And anything under the roof makes everything within the roof tame, right? Just like in a house, right? So if you're carrying a load, then the load acts as a roof and it kind of gathers in the tuma that's underneath it. So even if you happen to walk between the parts of the body, the load that you're carrying can be assumed to have passed over part of the dead body, and therefore, since you are also under the load, you also definitely become tame. Does that make sense? And the same applies to if you're riding in a carriage, right? The carriage is wider than you are, right? So sure, you yourself may have passed over a place in between parts of the body, but the wagon that you're riding in which covers you, it also covers areas beside you that can be assumed to have covered part of the body. And more the Bryce spells out Lafisha Mahalik Baraglav Afshar Lo Shalayiga. It's possible that if you're walking by foot, maybe you walked between the pieces and you didn't touch it. It's possible you didn't touch it, you didn't move it, you didn't come under the same covering as it. But Tona Rafa, but if you're carrying a load or you're riding in a wagon, then you definitely would have become tame through this covering. And furthermore, we're going to qualify it. The Tumas Atahom. This only applies to unknown Tuma, the Tuma of deep. But if it's known Tuma, then in other words, people knew that there was a body there, it was apparent, then you're definitely Tame. For the purposes of all three cases. Vezu Tuma Samam, what is Tuma deep? Koshen Makira Echad B'Sof Olam. Nobody knows about it. Makira Echad B'Sof Olam, but if someone knows about this dead body, Vezu Tuma Satam, then it's not considered unknown Tuma. Okay. So that's pretty well qualified. Hayatam B'Teven of B'Tzuros. If it was buried under straw or pebbles, then that's something that people cannot be expected to know about. It's covered. But if it's it's a little hard to figure. This must mean that if it's exposed, even if it's in the sea or in the dark or in crevices in the rock, so then Enzu Tuma Satam, that's not unknown Tuma, even if no one knows it's there. But if it's exposed, then someone could see it, and it's obviously not unknown Tuma. Below Amar Tuma Satam, Elo Lameis Bilbat. And this whole idea of Tuma Satam, of unknown Tuma, applies only to the Tuma that's transmitted by a dead body, but not, for example, a Zav or a Sheretz or anything else. This whole idea is only applicable to Tuma regarding a dead body. And we can stop here for today.
Thank you, Dov. Have a good day,
All right.
everyone. Thank you all.
See you tomorrow.
Yes.